I'm so thrilled to be sharing this space with you, Lita. I've been a long admirer of your work for many, many years. Just want to start by thanking you, Aline and Julian, everyone at OFFSCREEN for hosting this. And I'm going to go full back. 30 minutes probably isn't going to be enough time, but we're just going to go for it and see where we get to. And I wanted to start really at the beginning. And I think this is particularly important with your work because, of course, you're an artist that came about, in the 60s, 70s, at a period, working with light and space, in which biography was secondary, or it wasn't spoken about, it wasn't important. But I think in many ways, your biography is so critical to your that it's difficult to remove that from that. So I really wanted to start with, given the breadth of your extraordinary 6-decade career, which is phenomenal, I wanted to start really at the beginning with a two-part question. You were born in Santa Monica in California, but you spent most of your childhood growing up in Tunisia and Paris in France. So firstly, I wanted to ask you, how did these spaces, geographies, places inform your work or your life? And then secondly, how did you come to art, or how did art come to you?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say how delighted I am to be in conversation with you. I'm a great admirer as well. And thank you, Eileen. It's really wonderful. And I also want to thank everyone here. I just feel so warm, I'm sure everyone does, in this beautiful space where we're all here in the heart of Paris. I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with a little meditation, which will explain the question. I will go into the question after, but it will take us a little bit why, once I answer the question, after the meditation, where the meditation comes from. Some of you, if you want to close your eyes, I'm just so impressed with this little beautiful green room. So we can close our eyes, it'll take a minute or two. And I just want to gronk the moment to place us in time and space. So tonight is Friday, October 18th of the year 2024 at 9:51 p.m. in the beautiful city of lights of Paris, in the country of France, in the continent of Europe, in the northern hemisphere of our beautiful planet, Earth, third planet from our soul star that is nestled in Orion's arm in our Milky Way galaxy. Next to our Milky Way galaxy is a Virgo cluster of galaxies containing billions of galaxies. Next to the Virgo cluster is a super great cluster. Next to that is Lanakea. They've named it Lanakea, which in Hawaiian means heaven. Heaven, or Lanakea, contains hundreds of billions of galaxies. I'd like for us to stay here for one moment, imagining our neighbors, the hundreds of billions, imagining that beyond that is a super great cluster of galaxies, again containing hundreds of billions of galaxies, to the Virgo cluster, to our Milky Way galaxy. And on the right side of it, if you look straight in the center, about 4 p.m., is Orion's arm, where our solar system is nestled in there. And we, as planet Earth, is rotating around our soul star. We come back to the northern hemisphere, to the continent of Europe, to the country of France, to the city of Paris, in which, in this beautiful hotel, El Dorado, about 40, 50 of us are sitting here sharing this moment on Friday, October 18th of the year 2024 at 9:53 p.m. It's taken us 2 minutes. And so I'd like to start with that.
Thank you.
So, to answer Chris's question, I grew up in a convent in North Africa in Carthage. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I think I spoke to Chris about it. Carthage, as you know, is the site of an incredible historical site. The convent was on a hill overlooking the Mediterranean. I was there from a very early age. My mother was around, but she put me in a convent from the age of 3. And instead of parents, what I attached myself to were the stories of the Catholic Church, the paintings, the Renaissance paintings of that, of course, the Mediterranean and the blue and the earth. And so that was my dialogue. That was what I played with. We would go to the Roman ruins. I would play with the earth there, imagining all these stories that Christians were being eaten by lions and all kinds of imaginary things. And then my father lived in Paris, and I would come to Paris and totally in love with Paris, totally in love with the theater. I went to a children's theater when I was 5, and I wanted to stay. And I told my mom I'm staying. Of course, that didn't happen. But those spaces, that kind of cultural, multicultural, also religious of that kind of North Africa in the 50s and Paris in the 50s. That kind of combination of the freedom of nature, the freedom in a way of having a huge interior life, of being in this kind of place that was about prayer 5 times at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was, you go to the chapel at 5 o'clock in the morning, you could hear the metzwin from the mosque. You know, it's this kind of incredible richness. That was only during the school years. In the summer times, I would be home playing on the beach, and then come often to Paris and the incredible culture here that I was totally in love with. So that was a big influence. Then my phone is contemporary life. Then my mother, who was a playwright, she actually had her first play produced in Paris in 1933 at the age of 20, under a man's name, because that was the way to make things happen. She was a playwright, and she had been in the US in the 30s and always wanted to go back. So that's how she met my father, who was on his way to Brazil, and they moved to the US. When I was 5 months old, she took me back to Tunisia. So that was kind of a little autobiographical.
I'm going to continue there because we're going to do the full years. But you talked a little bit about this, your kind of move into theatre at quite a young age, and of course your work is so interdisciplinary. There is this kind of disruption between materials. There's an embrace of genre fluidity within your work. And I've done a lot of research, and I've read that, you know, at around the age of 5 you wanted to be a dancer, and then you wanted to work in theatre, and then you went back to wanting to be a dancer. I think you did a bit of back and forth, and then it was your early teens that you wanted to become a poet. And I think during the period where you wanted to be in theatre, you realised that actually you didn't want to speak other people's narratives, you wanted to speak your own. So I wanted to, touch on that, but also talk about a very particular period in your career when you were, you'd moved to the other colony, which was a 132-acre area between Tunya Canyon and Big Rock. It was the site of Coffee House Positano, and you've described it as having this kind of very incredibly beatnik vibe. And you were surrounded by artists, writers, actors, filmmakers. And I wanted to just ask you about this very particular moment in your career, how that informed where you are now, but also this shift between materials and processes.
Absolutely. So yes, as Chris was describing, it was 132 acres of land overlooking the ocean, where we had all kinds of disciplines. I really grew up there as an artist in that it was complete nature. We were faced due south. You could see the seeming motion of the sun going from east to west, the moon going from east to west. I really started to observe the light of the sun on the ocean, that kind of thing, and at the same time have conversations with actors and dancers and musicians. and it was a real place of freedom in that way. And so, and my husband at the time was a flamenco guitarist. We would have these amazing fiestas. And so it was, the collaboration became really big in my work. And I think it had a lot to do with being in that colony and being part of all kinds of interdisciplinary artists.
What sort of work were you making at that time?
At that time, I was mainly drawing, and I was mark making.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how I started my practice. I was very interested in time, and I had been influenced by Robinson Crusoe Friday, who used to mark time on the island. And so I started by playing on wood, actually marking time. And then as I marked time, then it became more and more all these marks that would then layers of marks and then going into it. And then it became about light, but it was a lot about time and mark making.
So I wanted to move a little bit, because of course you're known for your work that uses land or the earth as another material. And I wanted to ask you about that specific epiphany when you moved from traditional confines of the canvas or paper and started using land as your medium.
Yes, I was really surrounded by light and space artists. I lived on that colony, but also I had a studio in Venice, California, where all the Southern California artists who were in the light and space movement were. It was at the time of minimalism, at the time of performance, at the time of video art, it was the early 70s. And so there was a lot of that. There was also Robert Irwin, who was the grandfather of light and space. And he used to go around to all of us and talk. And once I went to one of his shows, it was a white cube, and all he did was black tape at the eye level. Mm-hmm. And what that did for me, all of a sudden I saw that a single gesture, that simple of a gesture, changed the entire room into 2 volumes. And that shifted me completely. I thought, well, what can I do with one gesture? And then that's when I went out into the landscape with making one mark and having, in this case, it was the context of the land itself. So that was really an epiphany of how I started looking at what art was, which was about space. The art really became about space. It also became about the human, right, as well. The mark making of a different kind. And it was very natural to me to work on the earth, which was, it just started. I had seen, of course, other artists go into dry lake beds, and I thought, wow, what if, because I was a painter by then, I became much more from drawing into painting. What would happen if I could go to these minimal spaces, like a blank canvas, and if I put color? And so that was the.
And that was Malibu Line?
Malibu Line was the first one. Yes.
Do you want to maybe describe that for
yes.
people that might not be familiar?
Yes, so Malibu Line was a project I did in 1978. I was taking dance at the time. The colony was a place where you could go up and up and up in the mountains. And as I was going up, I noticed that the verticality of my body against the horizon line of the sea below formed a cross. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I wonder if that's how symbols are formed, by the interrelationship of a human being with the environment. So I decided to make that, I would make a perceptual cross. And there was just land. And I dug a trench, filled it with blue pigment. And perceptually, because it was on a bluff, the ocean was below, perceptually the blue of the pigment went all the way to the horizon to form this cross. And it was really an incredible moment as well. I don't know if somebody here actually saw it. I met someone in Paris who told me they had been at the first one, which was kind of amazing. At the same time, I did what I called moon shadow, which was a circle of blue powder pigment right where the moon was setting. So it was that kind of, and then there was a boulder. Prior to that, I had been in Death Valley, which is a huge desert in California, and there were all these mountain ranges, and I wanted to cover the entire mountain range in blue pigment. Of course, was restrained, but I had a boulder, and I did that. And so it was the idea of, for me, the blue was the idea of connecting the earth and the sky, the earth and the heavens.
And I wanted to maybe touch a little bit on the use of color, actually. You touched on that a little bit with blue. You've said once blue is expansive and spiritual, pink is more about the body. And of course, your work is characterized by this profound use of an exploration of color. And of course, you have a very particular way of employing color within your work. You often use pure pigment. So I guess I wanted to ask, and also using pure pigment, but also predominantly primary colors, red, yellow, blue. And I just wanted to ask, one, why did you begin starting working with pure pigment? What was that doing that other materials that you were working with at the time wasn't doing? And also your choice of those colors.
It was alchemical. I was really interested in when one is in front of that kind of pure color, what happens to our perceptual system, that something shifts in us. And so I decided that it was important to do the purity of the pigment, and also I was doing very simple geometries at the same time. So it was a way of how to receive information. Like, the work is ephemeral, but what remains is the trace, and through color and through simple geometry, it just stays in your mind. And I was interested in that imprint. It was the idea of imprint. And the color, of course, the blue, I mean, it is about space. It is the Mediterranean. It's the idea of uniting the two. And Yves Klein was, of course, over the ocean in Nice, and had that same kind of influence. However, when I was doing that in California, we did not know about Yves Klein, which is unheard of now. But I had a friend of mine who had done a project called Blue Flame, where it was a house, 4 walls, brick walls, that she had very lightly put a primrose blue, and you walked into the space and you looked up at the sky, and the blue of her drawing just melted into the sky. And this was pre-Turrell. And I thought, that's just total magic. And I told her, that's it. I'm going to be doing projects about the relationship between the earth and the sky. So that was a big influence. And she was part of the light and space movement as well.
So I think that's a nice segue to talk about, obviously, why we're all here, is your off-screen presentation, which is the Washington Monument Project from 1980. It's a landmark work and really came at a really pivotal moment within your practice and your career. If you haven't seen it, I urge you all to go and see it. There is an incredible body of archival material that's never before been seen. And this was really kind of a remarkable project, actually, at the time. Of course, you were working with scientists, authorities. You were, presenting off-screen design documents and plans, which had never before been seen. And first, really thinking about this as being your first major urban intervention.
Yes.
You had often kind of worked in kind of more natural settings, of course, by the sea. And I was just wondering whether you could talk a little bit about, one, the genesis for that project and why you took the monument specifically, but also thinking about how that expanded on your kind of own interest in the relationship between your own body, human, and the relationship between Earth and the cosmos.
Absolutely. So this was done for the International Sculptural Conference, and it was a day that only dealt with ephemeral art. And so I was asked to do a project that was about the ephemerality. And I hadn't been in Washington. I went there. It was to be done on the Mall. And I saw the obelisk, and I studied a lot of Egyptian ancient stories. And so I knew, instantly, I thought I was going to cover the shadow of the monument in blue pigment, so that at one point in time, and its very long shadow would align to that. But it was so 2,000 feet long by 55 feet across. There was no way we could do that kind of intervention. And I just looked up at the Pyramidion, and I thought, I can just do the tip of the shadow. It would still have the same effect. the reason I chose the piece was I thought, what could be more ephemeral than time? And so through the shadow, that's what I was, the whole project really is, one of the aspects is about time and how we're rotating around the earth at nonstop, right? And so the other thing why I used red there is I'd had a dream where I saw, right around that time, where I saw a red pyramid in the interior of the earth. I was imagined way below this red. So I thought, well, I'll do it. Right.
I had the joy of working with Judy Chicago for a number of years, and of course she was involved both in light and space and also with land art. You know, she was known for her atmospheres in which she wanted to insert this kind of feminist impulse into the traditionally patriarchal kind of construction
Yes.
of land art at that time. And I was wondering whether you had this same urge of kind of inserting this feminist impulse in your working, but also whether you were deliberately thinking about kind of countering the male contributions of land art. And one in particular to Washington Monument, of course, is that you said that this has been open to so many interpretations, one being the fact that it's a triangular shape. And of course, that it's a symbol of patriarchy, it's a symbol of, you know, power in so many ways. And I was just wondering whether you could touch on that. That's quite a big question.
Yeah, well, it was definitely an intention to bring in a feminine look at land art that was, instead of yet utilizing the monument, which was the patriarchy, but doing things on a horizontal plane that was receptive. So it was a way of inserting that kind of power into the work, and definitely thinking about making a statement about feminism, really.
And I wanted to go back a little bit to this idea of the horizon line. You said this amazing quote, you said that you found it fascinating that all of your land works are about a connection, either the horizon line or the stars above. It was always about connection. And in many ways, your work acts as a reminder that we share the same sky. We share, you know, are ultimately connected in some way, in some shape or form, despite the distances that are placed upon us in kind of metaphorical barriers or physical barriers. But I wondered whether you could talk about these points of connections as a site of contemplation for your work, which has been, you know, throughout, you know, 20 years or so, even longer.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit, I'm not quite getting the question.
I wanted to just ask you about this kind of idea of the horizon line, one, and also using the stars as this kind of point of departure within your practice, but also thinking about how you think about these points of connection within your work.
Yeah, I think all the work is about connection. I think having left a country at a very early age, it was a way of finding, it was about location and about time, and it was also about longing, but a need to connect with, I mean, the Malibu line, we redid it actually this year. We have a Tunisia curator here tonight actually, who was very involved in making that happen. And so it was the idea that it was a gesture for a need to connect on a very personal level. I lived, in my childhood, I lived on the beach, and across the way was France. My father was in France, and it was the idea that he would appear on the horizon. I think a lot of my work has had to do with that kind of need to connect with him, and with presencing an absence. And so that was that. When I was out in the desert, I started making drawings that were connecting to the mountains. And then it became about the stars. So it was all about this need. And then from that, it became an understanding how we are, in fact, connected, that we're a sculpture in space, we're completely surrounded by stars, that we are, that importance of understanding that we're not just by ourselves, that there is that connection. And so it became a mission to make work is about that is about remembering that we're totally aligned to this system, this stellar system that is very precise, and that puts us in a time and space. I'm not sure I'm quite explaining it the way I'm intending, but that's, yeah.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about, we're going to go back again actually in terms of kind of feminist art making at this period, because of course your work is about impermanence, the passage of time, the power of embracing something that is fleeting and is not going to exist forever, but also so central to the connection of, you know, nature, the earth, and the landscapes in which you're inhabiting, or we all inhabit. And of course, unlike other artists, you know, the male artists of the land art movement, who were really, their work wasn't necessarily about that. They were about permanence, and in ways they were destroying the earth to make work. You know, and it's interesting because of course Malibu Line from 78, you know, disappeared into the sea air, while Soul Star from 96, which was staged at the Pyramids of Giza, was destroyed by the high desert winds. And I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about this, about how, whether you consider the earth and its temporalities as a collaborator within your work, whether you think about this as you're conceiving these works.
Yeah, it's very much the idea that it's almost putting dust to dust. It's a relationship with, by using, in a way, the pigments are ground up earth, by using the materials from the earth back to the earth. It has that kind of reverence and sacredness about it. It does talk about time in a very different kind of way. It's about, it's also about the heart. It's really an act of love in a way. It's very intimate, and therefore, and then the wind blows it away, you know. So what's important is that there is that connection that then disappears, but the connection's always there.
Beautiful. I think that's a really nice note to end on. But I would love to hear what you're currently working towards, and whether anyone else in the room has any questions for you.
Absolutely. Well, what's really interesting is that, first of all, I think there's the interest in what's happening right now in the early works makes a lot of sense in terms of that it shows the kind of freedom and experimentation that was happening in the 70s that we've kind of lost right now. Except it's being re-grounded in that we're able to show marginalized communities, and that has a certain freedom. And I think that idea, the whole idea of being an artist is about freedom, and so and to have an understanding of who we are in the cosmos. And I hope that the power of art really does that. Right now, what I'm also doing is I'm making films, and it's a different kind of, the ideas are the same, but done obviously through a narrative where everything we've been talking about is there's no human involved, right? It's abstraction, and now it's they take the same ideas, but then it's bringing the narrative to the human. And so I'm working on a third film that I'm really excited with, and also we're going to be doing, Malibu Line was redone with the intent that there will also be one in Tunisia that will be connecting the two again. Yeah. Beautiful metaphorically.
Thank you, Lita.
Thank
Does
you,
anyone
Chris.
have any questions? Everyone needs a wine.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You touched on it so beautifully in the questions already, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about the pigment, because it feels like it's such a signature for you. And why? Where did it come from? Is it related to your early work with the drawing and the painting and the mark making and moving that into a broader horizon, as we touched on? are there other, and the dust to dust? I guess we have touched on it a lot, but I feel like it's so central to your work that I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about
Yeah,
pigment and
I
color.
think it moves from mark making to materiality. It's also the fact that within the material, within the pigment itself, it speaks to immateriality, and so that was what I was interested in, that it's alive, and so that's not the only thing. The power of that kind of intensity of color is really important, but it's using a material. The material itself speaks, right? I'm not using my hand. I'm controlling it to some degree, but not really. So it's the material that then has the power, and that's what I'm interested in, and that you can also lose yourself in just color. But that's, and the idea that within matter, embedded in matter is light. I've done many works with rocks where I pour pigment on them, and that idea is that it's a way of revealing the light that is embedded in matter, because when you really think about it, everything is light. That matter comes from the explosion of supernova, comes from light, comes from stars. So that idea I'm really interested in, but more than anything, it's that the immaterial through the material, and having it be a character in itself, right? It's alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have to take the plexi off of the triangle in off-screen.
Yes.
I had the enormous privilege of assisting Lita pouring the pigment into the pure copper triangle that is part of the installation of the Washington Monument project, which we're showing. And it's true, the pigment really dances. It's so vital, and it's so controlled and so uncontrolled at once. It's fantastic.
Right,
Thank
and
you.
so you can have a recul, you can really, it's like having a child. I remember the first time I had my girl, Isabel, it was like, who is this being? It's like this thing outside of yourself that is full of light, or what, everything, but it's that it's I guess it's the sacredness of everything, of all expression. Like the pigment itself has a subjectivity and an expression, and so there's the I was going to say adoration, or this just fascination, right, with what is it going to reveal to me. It's that kind of thing, and I think that goes back to the male versus more feminist approach, feminist or feminine, or less male oriented, where it's already, what is outside of you is enlivened by your gaze, right, by that. And so I think it is the sense of the sacred and the pigments. When I pour the pigment, I think of, it's like the making of worlds, like each particle. I think a lot when I'm doing it, that it could be, who knows, like when the world was made, somebody was out there was sprinkling particles, and that's who we are. So that idea of sacredness, I think, and that idea of allowing materiality to express itself in a very pure way. Yes.
Can you believe in something superior, God?
Come on.
Do you believe in something superior, which
Do I
exists?
believe in something superior? I think we are all expressions of all of it. We are definitely, it's not superior. It's within us. It's within us. And we're just part of it. And I think one of the things that's exciting about today, and what we're realizing, and you can see in the arts, you can see in a lot of things in culture, is that we're beginning to understand that everything has an expression, that it's not just us. It's an insect, or other kinds of beings, or life. There's an interesting idea that that everything in the universe has an interiority and a subjectivity that is constantly expressing itself. Everything, right? That's what we may call now superior. It's not, it's light, right? It's the idea of light. And it's really, we're at this stage where we're beginning to understand that kind of expression is to be nurtured, is to be understood, is to be seen, it's to be recognized, and it's to be appreciated and loved. And if you think of the universe like this, you're in constant ecstasy, right? If we can, it's so difficult for us to really understand this, but it's there. It truly is there, and so. But it's this allowance. It's the kind of, in a way, it's kind of a corny thing that I think about, like when I look at a human. It's like it's the idea of what is heaven. What is heaven? Heaven is looking at you. I know it sounds, but it's true. If we could really get away from our egos, I think that's what's so interesting about that kind of work that is really about freedom. If we could get away from, we can see that kind of beauty and that kind of the reality. It's a reality. That's why I like doing this exercise, the meditation that I do. It's not metaphysical. It's physics. It is what's happening right now. We're a sculpture in space, right? And we're an object in space, the planet itself, and the cosmos is an installation in which we partake in every day. And so if we start thinking that way, it shifts things. And I think it's so important today. Like, all we need is a little bit of light, a little bit to try and think differently, to think that way, to think about sacredness, and to think about that kind of needing to nurture and ourselves first, of course, but then everything around us. It changes the world, and I think that's so needed.
Just
Yes.
Coming back to that, were you aware of the work of Gina Pan in the 70s?
Of who?
Gina Pan?
No. Gina Pan?
She's, she lived in France originally. I think she might be Italian. And she did this performance work and also this very famous body of work when she links the earth, the artist, and the sky.
Mm-hmm.
I'll show you that.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
Because at the same time, in that very piece, she was very close to what you're working at the time.
And when was she? Is she?
She's dead now, because she died quite a long time ago. But in the 70s, she was working along that line.
Oh, I'd love to.
So,
I'd like to look at it. You had a question.
I was just going to continue from what you were saying.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask whether you had any daily rituals.
Yes, I have many daily rituals. Somebody once, when I told them that, they said, "Oh my God, you never get out of all this." I like to start with something I learned from Steve Jobs, which was an 8-minute of gratitude. And when I first started doing it, I was lying in bed and started thinking for 8 minutes of everything I'm grateful for. I could not hold it in my head. So maybe after just a few days, I started writing it down. And I've accumulated now years of this writing, which it's really wonderful. So it's another way of grounding, actually. I then go to the beach, and I was explaining to someone just earlier that and I run on the beach and I go swimming. And that's a definite practice that I do, that I've done for decades. And in 1993, this whole set of meditations came to me. Years ago, I had done Kundalini Yoga, so I had some kind of idea of that. And so what it is, the energetic meditations, I'm running, and as I'm running, I inhale from the sun to my heart and exhale from my heart to the sun. And I do that 10 times, so 10 breaths in and out. And then I do what's called dome meditation, where my arms, most of the time I try to have no one on the beach to see me, but my arms are outstretched. I kick my heels back while I'm running. I put my head out and I do 33 breath of fires, which is a Kundalini breathing technique. And then I go back to the 10 art meditations, and then again 33, then 10, then 33, then 10, till I've done 99 of the dome meditations, 40 of the yes, and yes, and then I let it all out, and then I let the breath out, and I bring I take the breath in a circular way through all the chakras, counterclockwise, then clockwise, then counterclockwise, and it just came to me as I was running one day, and so at one point I was doing that for 5 times a day. And then I go jump in the ocean and swim. So that's one. Then I go to the studio and I draw, and then paint, and or whatever I'm doing. But I do write a lot, and a lot of my work comes from writing. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Thank you for sharing that.
That's a lot.
Phenomenal.
Prescription, yeah. Prescription.
What?
I said it's a prescription. You just
Yes,
said it.
here it's
Oh, everyone's taking notes.
Everyone.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. No, it's excellent, but it's life. It's the life force. It's very, it's important to me to do that, and I do give it priority. It's definitely something I give priority to. It's what saves me in the
In the mess of the world.
in the mess of the world. Yeah. But
Thank you, Lita.
You're
It's been-
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for having this moment. Thank you, Chris, for being here and for animating this moment. I feel like dialogue is such a precious thing that brings things out and creates new things for us. So thank you for doing that with us and for us. And everyone, please have a glass of wine, and we're around, and we can continue discussing our morning routines and everything else outside. Thank you.
Thank you.
Inside. Thank you.
Thank you.